Lots of chatter that has gone on and is still going on regarding the idea of a part-time legislature. If you're a regular listener, you heard the lieutenant governor come on the program and advocate for it. Just before that, you heard our representative, Dr. John Bison, say, So even members of same parties are on opposite ends of this idea, and so we've been trying to consult folks who have some perspective on these things, who can give us their opinions and help us sort that out. Today we're joined by former mayor and former senator and former representative, Dr. Joe Schwarz, today to talk about that, among other things. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Richard. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for being here today. It's interesting because this idea gets floated pretty often, and one of the reasons to support it is that a lot of states apparently do it. But we don't really know if that's a good idea or not, so we'll be interested to hear your thoughts. But the lieutenant governor says, yes, a part-time legislature would be good. Others say not so sure.
Well, I respectfully disagree with the lieutenant governor on that. The lieutenant governor had a few years of legislative experience, but not much. And Michigan is a complex state. We're either 8th, 9th, or 10th in population, depending upon what the population of North Carolina and Georgia is on any given day. But we're a complex state. And if you go to a part-time legislature in a situation where we already have a term-limited legislature, you're going to have people going up there just putting in their time, just dropping in for a hamburger and a Coke a couple days a week for a couple of months and then go home. They're not going to get anything done. They're not going to have any knowledge in depth about the things they have to do, particularly the $55 billion state budget. So it doesn't work. Now, the argument is made, well, some states have it, and I would counter that argument. Well, I'm a property owner in Montana, and I have a home in Montana, and so I'm familiar with their legislature. Well, the Montana legislature meets 60 days every 2 years. Well, that's fine, except there's only 1 million people, barely, in the entire state of Montana, and it probably works for Montana, but it won't work for a place as complex as Michigan. Mm-hmm. And if people want change in the legislature, they want to have new personnel come to the legislature, there's an election every 2 years for the House and every 4 years for the Senate, and I would suggest to them use the elections, because the idea of part-time legislature doesn't work, and what you do is you transfer all of the power, part-time and term-limited, all of the power to the executive branch, to the governor and his minions, or her minions, depending upon who's governor, and to the lobbying corps. And the only real repository now, since term limits came in 1992, repository of institutional knowledge in Lansing is the lobbying corps. And the numbers of lobbyists have increased significantly since 1992. Mm-hmm. I don't think we want that. You want a competent legislature. You want people who want to be in the legislature. You want people who will spend the time doing the job in the legislature, which is the way it used to be and is no longer. So part-time, term-limited legislature is a bad idea.
What happens in a state like Montana where they meet for 60 days every 2 years? If something urgent happens that needs attention in between, do they have special sessions?
Yeah, the governor can call a special session.
Yeah.
It happens very seldom, but the governor can call a special session. In Michigan, the governor can call a special session. There's no question about that. And in my memory, which goes back now quite a few years, it has happened on occasion. But in every state, the governor has the option to call a special session.
All right. And so the notion is we just have a lot of work to do around here that part-time legislature wouldn't be able to keep up with.
They wouldn't be able to do it. They wouldn't understand it. State government in a state like Michigan is complex, and you've got to have people that know things. You've got to have people who are specialists in certain things that the legislature considers. I mean, in my time in the legislature, I loved it, and I became a specialist in higher education in the 15 state university campuses. Others become specialists in agriculture. Mm-hmm. Others become specialists in the prison system, whatever, things that the legislature has to fund. But the idea of part-time What you're going to get is a bunch of people who aren't sure what they're doing, who are told to go home at a certain time, and you're not going to get really any really competent people and people who have the interest and the background to serve in the legislature. It simply will not work in a state like Michigan.
So is there any argument for a part-time legislature that you can see?
In a less populous state, and we've used Montana as an example, but there are 7 states that have only 1 member of the U.S. House of Representatives, compared to California, who has 53, or Michigan that has 14. So in perhaps those less populous states, or the 4 states that have 2 members of the U.S. House, a part-time legislature might work. I say might, because I don't know the details of how the governments in those states work. But as a rule, it's saying you are a part-time legislature and you're only going to meet 40 days every 2 years, or 40 days a year, and then you're out of here. You're probably not going to get, not even probably, you are not going to get the job done that needs to get done. And the number one job constitutionally in each state legislature is a budget. Write a budget.
Complicated already.
Get it passed. Yeah. Get it to the governor. Get the governor to sign it. And that's complex business, believe me. I was on the Appropriations Committee all 16 years. I was in the Michigan Senate, and it's hard work.
The part that you said that sticks with me, and I heard Representative Dave Maturin say it when he was here too, is when you have a part-time legislature, it just sends more power to the executive branch. This goes against the whole notion of democracy, doesn't it? I mean, you don't want one unit having all the control.
No, it goes against the whole notion of co-equal branches of government, which is what we have and what works well. I served in the legislature under 2 governors, Jim Blanchard and John Engler, and I must say both of them, Blanchard a Democrat, Engler a Republican, worked very well with the legislature. I can remember numerous times when the phone on my desk would ring at 4 o'clock. I'd pick it up, and it would be Engler on the other end of the line saying, "Joe, my office, 5 o'clock." It's, "Yes, Governor, I'll be there." And you go, and there'd be a meeting, probably 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans there, an issue. And we wouldn't leave until we got the issue hashed out and got ourselves going in an appropriate direction. And that is a good thing. And that was a time before term limits where the legislature really worked pretty well together. We crossed the aisle when we needed to. People could pretty much vote their minds when they needed to. You weren't called upon, pressured to vote with the party. And I believe the legislature worked much better in those days than it does now.
So is it as simple as this? A lieutenant governor with supposed aspirations to be governor is now saying we need a part-time legislature because he'd have more power?
I don't think he's saying quite that. Okay. He did not have a lot of legislative experience. I think he may have had 2 terms in the House when he became lieutenant governor. So that's not a lot of experience, believe me. This is an idea that appeals to the base, perhaps even a small part of the base of the Republican Party, which is why he's doing it, because you need the base to get the nomination for governor.
Got it.
But the fact of the matter is it is not a good idea. I don't think in the end it's going to go anywhere, but he's waving it around out there to kind of activate the base and to get the base to support him as we go through the process of, as the Republicans go through the process of choosing a gubernatorial nominee for 2018.
This is the way politics works now.
Well, it does. It does work that way. It's, in many ways, unfortunately, but even saying politics works might be an inappropriate thing to say.
All right. Is it your sense that there's a fair amount of resistance here that it won't?
Yeah, I don't think it's really going to go anywhere again. I think it's the lieutenant governor is doing this for the base to help him get their support for the Republican nomination for governor next year in 2018. But as far as if it has any legs, I don't think it does.
Okay, fair enough. You've been in the news a little this week yourself, practicing for a long time at Grace Health, and that's over now. Any thoughts on whether you'll practice more?
Well, I may. Who knows? I don't know. I think with all due respect, I think Grace Health made a mistake because these people, irrespective of what they say, they really don't have any place to go with their problems. Some of them have very complex problems, and the door was always open. And some of them are patients that I'd been seeing for many years. Some of them were cancer patients, other patients with complex ENT problems. It's an example where the folks in Suite C don't know what's going on down in the field, and it's too bad. I think that they will ultimately regret that they did this. In my case, I just move on. I'm an adjunct professor at the U of M, and we'll start back down there on the 5th of September. I'm on more boards and commissions than you can count, and I've been going around. Actually, did 2 stops last night, Chelsea and Albion, promoting what we hope will be a ballot issue in 2018, this Voters Not Politicians issue, where the apportionment, the drawing of congressional district lines and legislative district lines will be done by a nonpartisan or bipartisan commission, because if you have a state like Michigan, where roughly in statewide elections, there's roughly 50% vote Republican and roughly 50% vote Democratic. I mean, there's a few third parties in there and everything. When I say roughly, if you have that, yet our congressional delegation is of 14 is 9 Republicans and 5 Democrats, and our state Senate is 27 Republicans and 11 Democrats, and our state House is 63 Republicans and 47 Democrats. The district lines are being drawn using the old hackneyed term, but the old term, gerrymandered, and that's really not fair, and it takes away the good discussion, the good competition that you should have when you discuss an issue. My old friend Congressman John Dingell, who served longer in the U.S. House than anyone in our history, 59 years, said the biggest thing you need in a congressional district, and I'll put that over into legislative districts as well, is common community interest. And if you look at our congressional districts and you find congressional districts that have real common community interest, they're relatively hard to find. Our congressional district is an example of absolute gerrymandering. We are oriented in this part of the state east and west. We're oriented up and down I-94 and up and down I-96, but we're not oriented north and south. So our congressional district, Calhoun, Berry, Ionia, part of Mecosta, and 460,000 people in Kent County doesn't represent us well. There's no common community interest. For 90 years, until 1990, Battle Creek and Kalamazoo were in the same congressional district, which worked, and that's the way it ought to be now. And there are examples of this all over the state. So California has a bipartisan reapportionment commission that has worked very well. It was the one thing that Arnold Schwarzenegger can say, I did while I was governor. That was his baby. And we need to have one in Michigan and more appropriately draw lines for congressional districts and for legislative districts. It would be a good thing, and it would make both our legislature and our congressional delegation more effective.
Let's do a whole show on that. Let's do a whole segment on that sometime.
I'd love to.
And we'll talk about how to get that done and what's involved in that. And so we'll do that. So the point is, Joe Schwarz is plenty busy.
I have lots and lots to do. I would love to go back and practice medicine at time, because I felt like I was being forced to abandon these patients. And the idea that they are going to be taken care of, as well as they're going to have as many places to go. They're going to have the care that they had, especially the ones with complex problems. That's simply wrong. And but it's the problem that you have with lots of boards of directors, whether it's this board of directors or others, especially for nonprofits. They come to a meeting once a month. Half of them haven't read the agenda. The meeting's over in 2 hours. They go home and they don't show up again for another month. And they don't know what's going on. The people on the second and third floor don't know what's going on down where the action really happens.
I want to take a minute quickly before you go to talk about the state of affairs in Washington at the moment. What do you make of this North Korea business?
Well, here's what I make of it. We know North Korea is a bubble. We know that Kim Jong-un is, what's the diplomatic term I could use? Unbalanced.
Mm-hmm.
We know that the communication in and out of North Korea is such that these people are really isolated. They will do crazy things, and it's up to us not to get drawn into that. We can wipe them out in a heartbeat if we want to, but that's not what we ought to be doing. What we ought to be doing is talk, do everything we can to kind of keep them in North Korea, keep them contained. And you say, well, then you're going to have to hope something happens, and something doesn't happen. And that's right, we're going to have to hope something doesn't happen. But as Churchill said, and absolutely correctly, talk is better than war. And we just have to keep them contained. If we had to, we could do what we needed to do. That's not what we should be doing right now. We should try to contain them and cool them off. You remember Bill Clinton sent Jimmy Carter
Right.
To North Korea while he was president to negotiate with the regime there, and maybe something like that ought to be appropriate right now.
Do we need to walk back some of the things the president has been saying, or is this assertion of, I guess, power is appropriate?
Look, Richard, the president, God bless him, is a loose cannon. Probably not wholly qualified to be president, if you want to get right down to it.
Mm-hmm.
But he's got good people, Secretary of Defense. He's got General Kelly. He's got others, General McMaster, and again I mentioned General Mattis. I have to believe that they meet frequently, and they meet with the Joint Chiefs of Staff frequently, somewhere deep within the bowels of the Pentagon,
right?
So that they have a plan to kind of control and deter things if they get out of hand, and the president gets off the reservation.
And that's where the rubber meets the road.
It is where the rubber meets the road.
Okay. We'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thanks
sir.
very much, Richard. Nice being with you.
Dr. Joe Schwarz on 95.3 WBCK.